Hey guys, James MC Reviews here, and miraculously, we have made it through another year. 2022 is about to be over, and it sure has been a year. We've seen a lot happen this year, both good and bad, mostly bad, but the one thing that has stayed constant has been movies have been released and I have gone to see them and talk about them. And first and foremost, I want to thank you guys straight up for another really great year on YouTube. I say it every year, so I sound like a broken record, but the support that you guys give me and the fact that you guys still care about like watching me and what I have to say is just amazing. And this year I saw some like, you know, really high like numbers, which granted the numbers don't really matter to me that much, but still like seeing that the number raise and seeing that people actually are watching my stuff gives me the motivation to keep going and keep making more videos. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. And keeping with the tradition of ending off the year, it is time to recap the best and the worst that this year's movies had to offer. For those of you who have been around for a while, I would highly recommend checking out the best and worst movies of the year playlist, where I've counted down movies from the past few years. I'll leave a link to it down in the description or in the card. But for those of you who are new around here, just a couple of housekeeping rules. These are not the scientifically proven worst movies of the year. Your list may be very different from my list. Feel free to leave your list down in the comments. I'd love to know what you thought were some of the worst movies of this year. On top of that, seeing as how I am only one person with a life outside of YouTube, I am more than willing to bet I did not see a lot of the worst movies that came out this year. So if you feel like I missed anything, or if you think something came out this year that should have been on my list but isn't, also let me know that down in the comments. I'd love to hear. And keeping with the tradition of last year, since I brought back the honorable mentions, I figured I would do that again this year. So it's basically like an unofficial top 11 list. So the honorable mention for worst movie of the year would have to go to Hocus Pocus 2. It feels like they saw the first Hocus Pocus and were like, let's do that again, but worse. We didn't need the Sanderson sisters backstory. We didn't need to be stuck with these bland characters with no personality. And although there are moments here and there, we didn't need this movie. The original isn't even that great, but I'd much rather watch that again than this watered down, cynical follow-up. Alright, with all that out of the way, it's time to get onto the list. Here are the top 10 worst movies of 2022. I'm trying to make the world understand by making movie movies. The 355. I know this is kind of low-hanging fruit as it's essentially Charlie's Angels Part 2, but it really is that dull. Movies like Alita and Wonder Woman have shown that female-led action movies with a strong message of empowerment can work, so why do we continue to get this surface-level garbage? But to Charlie's Angels' credit, at least I remembered how bad that movie was. This was so generic and so cookie-cutter that I'm honestly struggling to remember a single thing about this movie, even as I'm writing this. I'm willing to bet even the actors don't remember being in this movie. That would make sense, seeing how all of them read their lines like they just want to go home. The script sucks, the directing sucks, even the action wasn't all that special. It was just an overall forgettable movie, and honestly, being forgettable is one of the worst crimes a movie can commit. Men. This movie is disappointing because, unlike a lot of the movies on this list, this had actual potential. There were things about it that I liked. The cinematography was stunning, there were so many beautifully laid out shots. The score was eerie and ethereal without being overbearing, and the performances from Jessie Buckley and especially Rory Kinnear, who I didn't realize until much later on was playing multiple characters at once, were very effective and helped elevate the movie. Unfortunately, these strong elements cannot save this movie's story. It feels like one of the most obvious cases of style over substance. Nothing feels motivated, and it seems more concerned with delivering this whole men suck message than providing something coherent or meaningful. I'll give it that its imagery was at least memorable, but it felt like it was just there for shock value. Even though I have this on my worst list, I'd still say at least check it out once, because I can guarantee you will get something out of it that I didn't. and it's at least worth it for those stronger elements I mentioned earlier. It's just a shame the story wasn't as strong. Halloween ends. This movie was absolutely infuriating. Did David Gordon Green use the Star Wars sequel trilogy as a framework for his Halloween reboot? Because the parallels are strikingly similar. Make the first movie familiar and nostalgia heavy with aging cast members to bring back fans, make a sequel that is divisive and flawed but ultimately fun, and then make a finale that trips over itself and makes the entire thing feel pointless. And the saddest thing is, I don't think the storyline they were trying to do with Corey was a bad idea in theory. If this were a completely separate movie about a kid who is slowly pushed over the edge to be a killer, it could have been interesting. But the way they executed that here, especially with this being the final part of a trilogy, was not the right move. It took focus away from what people are actually there to see, which was Laurie versus Michael. And when we do finally get that in the last 20 minutes, you aren't as invested because the buildup wasn't there. The script sucks, the kills weren't that spectacular, and save for the last 20 minutes, it just felt like a huge waste of time. I know someone in my comments got mad at me for saying this, but I honestly wouldn't mind if they went back to the anthology concept for Halloween going forward. Season of the Witch is probably the best sequel in the series because it doesn't have Michael Myers, and it dared to be different and tell its own story. I feel like the reason audiences didn't respond as well to it back then was because the transition between two Myers sequels to something completely new was jarring. But now that the Laurie Myers storyline is wrapped up and we've seen anthology stories like Black Mirror garner mass appeal, I think it'd be interesting to try that with Halloween rather than just doing the same thing over and over again. But yeah, overall, this was a pretty weak ending to an otherwise promising trilogy. Ambulance. I'm sure there is some world where this movie is a dumb fun thrill ride, but for me, it was just dumb and obnoxious. When I talked about this movie in my April catch-up review, I made fun of all the sweeping drone shots in the movie. And yeah, there are maybe 3 well-placed drone shots that look kinda cool, but there are so many in this movie that after a while, it starts to feel like a punchline. It strikes me that Michael Bay wanted to play with his new toy rather than make a decent movie. The pacing and editing were nausea-inducing. The action was that same quick-cut close-up bullshit we see in the early Transformers movies. The actors are either uninterested or over-the-top scenery chewing. And overall, it was just dull. I know I'm in the minority because apparently this got pretty decent reviews, and to an extent, I kind of agree with the people saying it feels like a GTA 5 police chase. But if I wanted to watch a GTA 5 police chase, I would just play GTA 5. At least then it would be more fun because I can control what happens. But yeah, long story short, this movie wasn't for me. Moving on. Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore. This movie theoretically should be higher on this list because out of everything else on here, it's the only one that I've considered walking out of. In the 6 years that I've been going to the movies consistently, through all of the garbage that I've had to sit through of my own volition, I have never considered walking out of a theater. And this movie almost broke it for me. The only reason I ultimately stayed in the end was I figured, well, I'm already this far, how much worse can it get? But the fact that that crossed my mind at all just shows how bad this movie is. Even taking out whatever bias you have towards J.K. Rowling, this film is just dull. The characters you care about have had all their charm and likability sucked out of them. The new characters they introduce are boring. The screenplay is dull as dog shit. The story beats you over the head with its political commentary, and it's just a lifeless movie in general. The only positive I can give it would have to be Mads Mikkelsen as Grindelwald. He's the only one that makes this garbage dialogue sound natural. And of the 3 actors who have played this role, he's probably the best. But if this wasn't the final nail in the coffin of this long-dead franchise, then at the very least, it should be a wake-up call to never let Rowling write another screenplay ever again. Morbius. Wait. Wait, what's this doing on this list? Clearly this is the best movie of the year. With its breathtaking visual effects, ingenious writing, and gripping performances. This is an excellent framework for a no doubt equally brilliant Sinister Six movie, and I can't wait for the sequel. Okay, memes aside, this movie was fucking cancer. How the studio thought this was acceptable to release is beyond me. It feels like Sony must have multiple personality disorder, because for every No Way Home or Spider-Verse, there's a Venom or a Morbius. This movie feels like it's 20 years old. It utilizes all the worst cliches of early 2000s comic book movies. The script is pretty much all exposition. The pace of the story feels both too fast and too slow. The visuals in the movie feel like someone rubbed mud on the lens between takes. The action sequences are so poorly shot and edited that it's hard to even tell what's going on. And the clunky attempt to tie this into the larger MCU was not only hilarious, but it was made even funnier by Marvel instantly decanonizing it the minute it came out. The only thing I can kind of give this movie is Matt Smith. All the other actors are taking this way too seriously, but Matt Smith seems like he was the only one on set who knew what movie he was in, and he is fucking owning it. Everything else in the movie is complete cringe. It's one of the worst superheroes ever made and one of the funniest memes of the year. What else can I say? It's Morbin time. I hated that. Marmaduke 2022. I saw this movie on accident. My girlfriend was helping me with the order of this list, and we were looking at some other movies that came out this year we might have missed. Out of nowhere, we found this gem and said, fuck it, why not? And what we got was one of the ugliest animated movies I've ever seen. Look at these character designs. They look like rejected models from those animated Addams Family movies. The animation is so cheap looking. The lip syncing is so bad that I honestly thought this was an American dub of a foreign film. The voice acting is absolutely obnoxious. The story is every generic kids movie ever made. And the pacing is absolutely punishing. When we got to the dog show, we honestly thought we were close to the end, when really, we were only 20 minutes in. And that was the moment I made a 20-minute trek through a snowstorm to the grocery store to grab alcohol because I couldn't make it through this movie sober. I am not kidding. I honestly couldn't believe that Netflix allowed this to be released. This feels like one of those cheap knockoffs of Pixar or DreamWorks movies you'd find in the bargain bin at Walmart. It was admittedly a bit funny just because I couldn't believe what I was watching, but it was still awful. The question is, what could possibly be worse? Redeeming Love. This movie is just weird. It markets itself as this wholesome Christian love story, but then it has scenes of rape, beating, and graphic sexual content that seems a bit too steamy for your local church. On top of all the out-of-place shock value and jarring shift in tone, the story itself just drags on and on. There are several moments where the movie could end, but it just keeps going. The characters are both pretty unpleasant and clearly aren't good for each other. Their chemistry is pretty non-existent. The dialogue feels like it was pulled out of a Hallmark movie. And again, why did this seemingly innocent Christian romance feel the need to go full-on exploitation? Honestly, part of me is kind of glad it did, because the rest of it was kind of boring. The first 2 months of the year are typically a drought for movies, but as bad as this was, it was at least memorable, so that's something. Dashcam. I know this was released early at Toronto International Film Festival, but it went wide to the US and the UK in 2022, so it still counts. And either way, I physically couldn't leave this piece of shit off the list. This is one of the most obnoxious movies I've ever had to sit through. It leans into that COVID-sploitation subgenre that has formed over the past few years, and it makes fun of a lot of the stupid people during the pandemic. But it isn't really being provocative, it's just annoying. The main character is a pain to watch, which I know is the point, but you can still make that entertaining. When I got more enjoyment out of reading the comments in the corner of the screen, you know your movie fucked up. The cinematography is awful, the sound design is trash, the story makes no sense, the horror aspects aren't scary in the slightest, and it was overall just a big waste of time. What could possibly be worse than this, you ask? well,
Start making movie movies,
After Ever After. After skipping out on the last two sequels, I revisited this franchise on a whim to see if it's as bad as it was with the first movie. And not only was it bad, it was so much worse. The first movie took second place on my worst list the year it came out. It was dull and had little effort, but there were worse movies I saw that year. This easily takes the top spot, not just because it does a lot of what made the first movie bad, but because it actually attempts to acknowledge the problems with the characters. It recognizes how toxic they are and tries to develop them both as people, only for them to relapse just so they can sequel bait once again. Fuck off. The story sucks, the editing sucks, the soundtrack is obnoxious, the characters are fucking dense, it's one of the worst YA movies I've seen, and it is easily the worst movie of 2022. Well, that was painful. I'm gonna take a couple days off to relax my brain, but tune in next time where we're gonna go over the top 10 best of the year. Let's leave this year on a high note. Until then, thank you guys for watching. Let me know in the comments what you thought of my list, and let me know what your worst of 2022 list is also. Apart from that, be sure to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell so you can stay up to date on when I'm posting. Follow me on all my social media, subscribe to my main channel. Everything you need to know will be in the description. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you later.
all the movie makers of the world.